Hi, I'm Rusty Dornin from the Kaufman Fellows Academy, and we are delighted today to welcome someone who really has sat on both sides of the table as an investor and also as a startup CEO. Josh Becker was one of the founding partners at Redpoint Ventures, also New Cycle Capital, and now he is CEO of Lex Machina, a legal analytics firm that helps companies figure out their legal strategies. Welcome, Josh. We'd love to hear about how you really made this jump from VC to startup CEO first out of the base.
Well, thank you. As you mentioned, I actually started originally in the entrepreneur route before the VCs that you mentioned. So back in '94, decided I was going to start my first company with a friend, and very early internet days, and we started a company called Intraactive, building corporate intranets. And ended up teaming up with a friend Jack Hittery, who had started a company called EarthWeb, and got involved with EarthWeb as well. And EarthWeb went public in the early days in '98, and it became Dice.com. Is actually still a public company today. And then while I was doing that, I went back and did a JD MBA. At Stanford, and graduating, got into venture capital because I'd been pitching a lot of VCs at that point and been interested. And was with a big fund, went back to a company, had my own fund, and this opportunity really emerged through Clint Corver and Miriam Rivera, who I know are both quite involved with the Kaufman program, and I got involved with them in the Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs. So this was a new angel group that they had really helped to start. And Lex Machina was one of the first investments. Actually, was the first investment. Even before they formed the Stanford Angels, they said, "Hey, this is the kind of company we might fund." And I said, "Hey, that's really cool." And Clint said to me, "Hey, can you come in as interim CEO? They're looking for someone to help grow the company." And I said, "That'd be great. I've never been CEO before, and so I'll do it on an interim basis." And that was how I originally signed up. Once I got in, thought a huge opportunity. Loved the people, the technology, and ended up staying, and that's where I am 3 years later.
Great. Well, you've been on the funding side as a VC, and of course on the asking side as an entrepreneur. How has your view of funding for startups changed? I mean, has it changed as a result of being on this side of the table and being in the hot seat?
Well, I do think there's a little bit of an advantage raising money in sort of knowing a bit how VCs think and a bit how the Valley works from that perspective. So again, I think there's a slight advantage as an entrepreneur to kind of understanding that. In terms of whether my view has changed, I wouldn't say it has changed necessarily. I will say I certainly have a very different view of VCs as board members and have a real appreciation. I felt like I added value as a board member, and I still sit on a couple boards, but I've had some extraordinary board members, particularly Rob Siegel at Exceed, as well as Clint and Miriam for sure themselves, and now John Hamill at Q-Ball. So I've learned a lot from those VCs and how they engage and how our board works. I've learned a lot there. I have a lot of opinions about VC funding and such, but I'm not sure I've learned that much more. I can comment on that later in the interview, I guess.
Well, I mean, it sounds like maybe you have learned the importance of establishing a good relationship with whoever your investor is, because there's a good likelihood one of them may be on your board. Is that true? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, a good relationship in the fundraising process, do you mean?
Yes, I mean developing, finding that right VC to invest in your startup you're gonna have a good working relationship with.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and right, and that I knew at some level, but seeing it here, especially with early stage investors, how involved they are in the company, it is so important to find someone that is not just going to give you the money, but is someone that you like and respect, because you're going to go through a lot with them. And for me, even as we got later stage and folks said, well, maybe we don't need board meetings as often, I actually wanted to keep the monthly board meetings for a long time because I got so much value, from those sessions. And so it's really those times when you maybe don't have a VP of marketing, maybe you don't have a VP of sales, maybe you don't have a VP of engineering, where the board can really step up and provide so much value to augment your own thinking. So I'd say for sure, that relationship is important. And so Rob, I did know a little bit beforehand. John Hamill, I didn't, but I was able to form relationships and get people on the board that I have a good working relationship with.
We've got a few questions that are coming up. What are your personal hints for pitching VCs?
Good question. That's a longer conversation. Let's see if I can sort of distill it down. Well, I will say one of my investments from a venture perspective was O-Power, which went public about 6 months ago. And Dan Yates, who's CEO of O-Power, even though I thought I knew a lot about VC fundraising, he just ran the best processes I've ever seen, and he was always way oversubscribed at big valuations. And so each time for Lex Machina, every time I was getting ready to go out and raise money, I'd call Dan and say, hey, Dan, so tell me again, what was your sort of secret sauce, your point, And he said, there's always five more VCs you can meet with. And what that meant is at some point you're creating momentum, you're going around and having meetings, and then at some point you got to pull back on the hook and see who's there. You got to pull back on the rod, right? So you're kind of putting lines out there and trying to get people interested. And you don't want to pull back the line too early. Say if you only have one, that's sort of possibly serious. If they fall off, then you got to start the process over again. It's a lot harder. And what Dan always said to me is, there's always 5 more meetings. There's a lot of investors out there. There's always 5 more meetings to do. And what that meant to me is, go out and you can have those meetings until you really feel you've got 2 or 3 folks really interested, on the hook, so that when you pull back, 1 or 2 of them are going to be there, and you can go in and close a deal. So it really is an art. It's really about creating that momentum, but it's really having enough meetings so you got some folks who are really genuinely interested, so that you pull back and say, okay, who's in? That you got 1 or 2 folks there that you can close a deal with.
Okay. Next question is, what's the best way to approach a VC that typically only accepts referrals if you don't know anyone who has dealt with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you can't underestimate that, right? VCs are driven a lot by referrals. It's very hard. I mean, in my time at Redpoint, my time at New Cycle, I think in each, maybe once in 3 years, maybe there's something that came in over the transom that got a serious look. But generally, it is going to be referrals. I will say I think things are a bit easier today with LinkedIn, possibly Facebook, with Twitter, to kind of build that relationship. And I do know people that have tweeted out of VC and built a relationship that way. But not about their company, but they established a dialogue around a point. If a VC writes an article and you write back with an interesting point, hey, what about this and this? Then you could engage that person, right? So there are a lot more tools available now, I'd say, than when I started in the business. I was in VC in 1988. 1998, 99. I think it was a lot harder to do that. But I think there are tools now. You can see who people are connected with. You can, tweet out them. You can, find other ways to build at least some kind of rapport that when somebody says, hey, check out this plan, or you say, hey, by the way, I've got this startup, that you're not just that you get in the serious look pile.
Okay. And that's actually leading into the next question of, how can you tell when an investor is really interested? I mean, I know as an entrepreneur, when I'd been in meetings where people seemed like they were interested but weren't really. How can you tell if they're really interested?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, how to answer that? I guess I'd say there are some things, there are some body language, there are some, do they call you right? Do they email you afterwards or not? I mean, VCs are masters at seeing the next card, right? yeah, that's a great meeting and very interested. Let's follow up, right? And they will, in many cases, wait. If they can wait, they'll wait, and let's see how the next month goes. The next month goes. The next month goes. So it is a good question. And I guess that's why I think my first comment about the fishing line, analogy is so important, because I think there are some indications, but really you don't necessarily know. I mean, you generally know people who are not interested, and raising money myself, I got an appreciation for VCs who say no. I think I was a VC myself. Sometimes I was guilty of the maybe, and as an entrepreneur, really rather hear yes or no. But I think that's why it's really important to have enough lines out there, enough folks. Hey, I think this guy's serious. I think this one's serious. I think she's serious. And you get 3 or 4 of those that you say, great, we're looking to for term sheets by the end of the month. That 1 or 2 come through. Right.
Okay. Next question is, also in general, is it worth emailing your business plan to a VC, as it is often requested on their website?
As a cold intro, I would try not to do that. And it could be a fallback. But if you're just filling out a blind form, I'd still probably try to do something that's a little more of a teaser. But if you're not getting a response and you can't find that connection, then I don't think there's a harm in doing it. I don't think there's a harm. I don't worry about VCs misusing that information. But I'd still kind of try to hold that out there for the meeting. You want to get the meeting at the end of the day.
Okay. What are your thoughts on focusing on growing your business and waiting, hoping for VCs to approach you?
Well, it's a question of how much runway you have, right? I mean, that's a question. I mean, certainly it's that's better, if they're approaching you, and you always want, and those are sort of the tips, and I won't necessarily say tricks, but you do want it when you're talking to VCs. You do want to, hey, I'm not raising money yet, but so and so recommended you. I wanted to get your thoughts, and those are some things that people do to sort of solicit interest, when they're not officially fundraising. And I think some of those things actually are kind of important. I think the key is, and Reid Hoffman said this to me a long time ago, and he said, you never want to raise money without knowing at the time you raise money, what the next milestone is that's going to get you the next money, right? So I think we, as entrepreneurs, we always have to be thinking is, what are the milestone that's going to resonate with investors, whether they approach me or I approach them? What are the milestones that I can, I feel great about? Say, hey, we have X number of users. Now's the time to step on the gas, right? Or, we have 5 customers paying us $100,000 or more. Now we just need to expand sales and marketing. What are those milestones, right? And then again, if you do raise that money, what milestones are going to get you for the next round? Because there's always going to be a next round. And so you really have to be thoughtful of that. So I that's where I really encourage people. I think some people it's not, hey, look at my business, look at the opportunity. It's like, what's that milestone I just hit or I'm about to hit that justifies this next round? Step on the gas.
Okay, what are the main reasons for failures with startups? What are the no-go signs for you as an investor, when you're an investor?
Sure. I mean, actually, repeat the question one more time.
What are the main reasons for failures with startups?
Yeah, I don't think there is one main reason. Some people say more startups fail from indigestion than starvation, right? So startups that try to do too much. So sometimes that's a cause. Sometimes it's the cause of founder tension, right? That's killed a lot of startups. And so that could be a red flag. If they're in a pitch meeting and the founders are contradicting each other and have different views of the business, that can be a red flag. And I think that's important because, as a VC, you see so many, maybe 3 pitches a day, or whatever, 10, 15 a week, whatever, and so you're always looking for a reason to say no so that you can move on to, other things, and so, a subtle thing like that, if the VCs, if the founders have, clearly contradicting views or even slightly contradicting each other in a meeting, that can be a red flag. And you say, you know what, I'm going to focus my time on something else. So there are some things like that that can be red flags just in a meeting. Because they're things that can also lead to downfall of a startup. So there are many reasons that startups fail, but what you don't want to do in a VC meeting is, do some things that will clearly raise a red flag. Another thing that raises this is subtle thing that I have to caution people, right, is being overly boastful, right? If you say this is a revolutionary, I almost say, as a VC, you almost just immediately throw away any plan that says this is a revolutionary, X, Y, or Z, right? Because you see so many plans. Like if someone's just like, this really seems to have an unrealistic, or they compare, here's comms or WhatsApp, like 18 billion. Well, unless you're really a messaging business that's somewhat related to WhatsApp, you should not be using them. And that itself can be a complete credibility, breaker. On the other hand, the last point is that your financials, they have to be big enough to interest an investor, right? Because they're not going to believe them anyway. They're going to haircut them, but they say, hey, if these guys don't think the market is, if these guys don't think it's that big an opportunity, then then I'm certainly not going to invest. So that's a little, caution on that side too. So there are a lot of little things that you have to be careful of.
Okay, here's one. See if you can remember one. What was the weirdest pitch you've ever got?
Well, I remember, when I was at Redpoint, one thing I kept for a while was like a business plan, which it was a short plan came with a form at the end that said, I will invest the following amount of dollars. It's like a form you're supposed to fill out. Like, that's the following, I know, I got a lot of God at Redpoint, be like, kind of 1-800-GOD or something like that. That was kind of amusing. But every era has its crazy pitch. People always try to make an analogy. For instance, the eBay of this, or the Amazon of this, or the Dropbox of that, or the Uber of this, and those shorthands, actually sometimes they can be helpful, but sometimes they get kind of funny too.
Okay. What is the biggest challenge for you in the change of role from VC to entrepreneur?
Well, I'd say, for sure, it's, it's really the focus, right? As an entrepreneur, you have to be laser focused, and even at one company, there's all these distractions, but you have to be just really laser focused. And at VC, you're naturally compartmentalizing all the time. There's time you spend with your companies you invested in. There's times you spend looking for new companies. There's times you spend evaluating companies. So that's really the biggest change, is just being able to really put the blinders on and just really focus on one thing.
Is it realistic to think that a software firm in today's market could get funding pre-revenue but close to general release in a segment that is not necessarily capital light?
Well, I'm not sure, because software, I'm not sure what you mean by non-capital light software, like capital intensive software. So I'd have to learn a little bit more about that.
We can ask Ovidu if he could, type in a few more details about his question.
Yeah, I think just generally, you can either you can raise money on the promise, or you can raise money on the reality. And sometimes it's easier to raise money on the promise if you can get people to buy in, to your vision. But those, if you're raising money on the promise, you probably have to have more meetings. If your numbers are off the charts, you're going to get lots of people interested. If you raise money on the promise, you're going to meet with 20 people, and 18 of them are going to say, yeah, maybe come back, or I'll keep, but maybe one or two say, ooh, I'd buy that. That's a big opportunity.
Do you think you're a better investor or a better entrepreneur, and why?
That's a good question. I'd like to think it was good at both. I think that, as an investor, I do have a kind of a wide network. Being in the internet since 1994, I know a lot of people have got a wide network. I think that's certainly helpful from a investor standpoint, and I think that did make me a good investor, both in sort of soliciting deals as well as being able to, kind of get people's opinions on things and just be in the flow. And I think that's helpful as an entrepreneur as well, to some extent. Like you mentioned, Rob Siegel, I'd known him to some extent since 1995. Now, I didn't know him well. I didn't really keep in touch with him, but it helped to have a bit of a warm intro when we finally met with them. So I think sometimes that network's helpful, and even in our business, helping get clients, helping, recruiting. So I'll just leave it at that. I think that the network has sort of helped me in both places. It's probably a little more helpful as a VC, but I think I'd say as an entrepreneur, the one thing that's I think helped me from a personality standpoint is just from a temperament, is being able to deal with people. Because as you grow a company, then it's all about people, right? And keeping your management team, all your marketing people and your sales people and everyone on the same page and moving forward. And you're always going to have disagreements, but I think I am good at that. So.
We did have a follow-up on that other question about the capital light. Capital light meaning a simple SaaS application versus enterprise software.
So if it's SaaS, then yes, certainly that's very much of the day. If the question is, would people still go for more of a traditional enterprise application? A little harder to answer. I'd say maybe. There might be an industry that justifies it, where people say, yeah, this is an old industry. They need stuff on premises for whatever reasons, and it's a big opportunity. So you may have to explain it more. But I think that's where the 5 more meeting rules come in. It's always 5 more investors to meet, and then you got to find someone who buys into your vision.
Okay. When's the earliest point you would suggest to go after funding? How many people in the firm? How far along in the development process?
Again, I think it's never too early in some sense. But you may have to have a lot of meetings, right? It's just getting someone to buy into the vision. The nice thing about starting early is, you could talk to someone and they could say, well, come back when your team's a little more formed, come back when this and this happens. And then you can come back to them and say, hey, I just hired this person, or hey, I just signed up, the biggest company in our space. So I think that's, an advantage. I think, think about that for a moment. Yeah, I guess it partly depends on your presentation and how good you are in selling the vision, right? Because there's certainly many cases in Silicon Valley of someone with a pad of paper going in raising $20 million, and that very much can happen if you've got a compelling vision. Obviously, the more pieces you can put in place around that will help more. But sometimes that can be an iterative process. Hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Okay. What are the top 3 industries you see having the largest opportunities?
Well, one of the disadvantages of being an entrepreneur is you get very focused on your one industry. So, it's harder to keep abreast of, trends and hot spaces and, opportunity. I am kind of amazed, even just from peripheral vision, the iterative opportunities that continue to be generated. I think that there's lots of opportunities to take a big old industry like law, like we're in, which VCs wouldn't have touched, 10 years ago, or education, or there's lots of, big old industries that now you can innovate on. It's easier to start companies, and so you can sort of go in there, and then again, iterative opportunities to kind of build on other businesses that were just created, like like Hootsuite would, hey, great, now there's a place you can go, just focus now around your Twitter feed, so or to make that process easier. So I think that I'm probably not going to be your best place for big trends right now. I'll just say I am amazed at the number of sort of iterative businesses, as well as the vertical kind of opportunities like we're doing. Like we consider ourselves kind of vertical big data, right? So we're a data analytics company, but we're going deep into one space.
Who was the best co-investor you ever had in one of your deals?
Think about that. I will say, I will say, I did work with DCM, and I have a lot of respect for them. And I was a summer associate when it was just starting out. As an entrepreneurial VC firm, back in 1998, and then had a chance to work with them. And I do have a lot of respect for DCM and the value that they bring.
Okay. Let's go back to maybe some startup CEOs type of questions. This week is talking about, how do you make sure there's enough money in the bank? How much of a runway are you comfortable with in terms of cash in the bank? When, as a startup CEO, would you be getting nervous? How many months do you want to see that you have right there, before you start thinking about, uh-oh?
Well, I mean, it's going to take at least 3 months to raise money, right? You have to allocate at least 3 months, and the timing of that is important too. That's 3 months. That's if you start January 1. If you start November 1, you're probably going to allocate 5 months, because you might get started in November and then come back in January. So, and then you don't want to cut it close. You never want to be 3 months away, because then it's just, that's too close. So, so if you look at those metrics, that you need at least 3 to 5 months, for a good fundraising process. That means, you want to try to never be, really 6 months. I'd say is, that's when you got to start getting really concerned, because, it's going to take you at least 3 months, I think, to get through that fundraising process.
Okay. We have another question. Do you feel Silicon Valley is in a bubble now, and why, or if not, why?
Sure. Just to finish that last question, I would say that I've been less. Here we were down to probably a month, of cash. So it happened. You sometimes get there, and you gotta keep working, and people sacrifice, and which we did here at Lex Machina, and we're in the middle process, and we got the money raised. So. But then you got to be thinking about all kinds of options. In terms of the bubble question, I've lived through 2, major crashes. One was a true bubble. The other one was really, bigger macroeconomic issues. So I'd say. There was, I think, certainly some of the public market valuations got out of whack, which led to some of the later stage valuations get out of whack, which did trickle down in the system. So I'd say, there was some irrational exuberance, I'd say, as Bill really has commented. On the other hand, I don't think it's, on the other hand, I think that a lot of the interest is warranted, right? There's just tremendous opportunity right now in technology. There's tremendous opportunity in big old industries like law, as well as new industries. There's reinventing media, all TV shifting online. I mean, there's just tremendous opportunities. So that's what makes me more confident that we're not in for an imminent crash. At the very least, there's lots of real businesses being created.
We are at the bottom of the hour. We have a couple more questions. Would you be willing to stay on and answer a couple more?
Sure, I can do a couple more. Yeah.
Is there any way to know if your burn rate is right?
Well, I'd say, it's always a question, right? Because of investment. I look at it in terms of both those milestones I talked about earlier, as well as the cash in the bank, right? So if you feel like you can accelerate the burn rate a little bit, and by doing so you're going to hit a milestone that you can then raise money off of, then it's worth taking that chance. If that milestone's not out there and you don't have visibility into that milestone, then you might say, no, let me lower the burn rate, preserve cash, so that I have longer to reach the milestone of which this can help me raise money. So that's the way I think about it. It's you can think about a number of months or other ways, but it's really about what is that milestone. Can you accelerate the burn rate, get there faster? You're confident you can hit it, or otherwise you got to pull back a little bit to make sure you really have the runway to hit those milestones.
Okay, when is the best time to raise money in your opinion?
Well, I think the best time is after some major milestone has been hit. Now again, I'd say a couple answers to that. So one is it could be right before a big major release, right? I would say raising money on the promise. So oftentimes that is a really good time. Hey, there's all these really exciting indicators. We got this cool thing. The market's primed. Okay, great. Now we just need the money. We're going to blow this thing out. That's great. But otherwise, after you've hit sort of milestone, hey, wait, we're an app. We hit 1 million users, or we've hit 100,000 users, or we just signed these 2 big customers. Great. There's the proof point. Now we've got product market fit. We've taken the product or market risk out of it. Now we just need money to accelerate. So that may be true, or that may be not true. It's for the investors to determine if they think that success is scalable. But I'd say those are the best times.
Okay, last question. Have you used someone to help you develop an impactful pitch? If so, who?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So both on the pitch side as well as the presentation side, it's very important. There's a woman named Serena Piedasa, and she has a business called Dynamically Speaking. I think it's dynamicallyspeaking.com. I think so. Her name is Serena, Surina, and Piedasa. We could spell later, but I think it's Piyadasa, something like that. But I could look it up. She's fantastic. So she is. I use her to help prime myself and the team for VC pitches for our seed round as well as for our A round. So she's terrific. Also for our A round, there's another woman we use that was referred by Rob Siegel to really work on more of the slides themselves, help us kind of tell the story. Again, I can remember her name. The last name is France. I could look up both of those if that was helpful. But that was great too. So yeah, I think it's
important. And then I can just email. I can email folks and let them know, what you said about that. And I did want to follow up on one thing because it's funny when someone asked about what's the best time to raise money. In my own head, I'm thinking, okay, well, I know August is bad and all that. Well, he just came back and said I meant per year. Which period? I guess Thanksgiving or Christmas is not ideal. Are there certain time periods, like right after Labor Day or that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, either January. I mean, given that 3-month, you want to go out either in January. January. You could start in April. And then hopefully get it closed before the summer. Other than that, and then you're waiting till September. Really, I mean, those are the optimal times. January to run a 3-month process, April or September. Those are the best.
Okay, well, great. Josh, thank you so much for joining us and for staying overtime to answer all the questions. This is the Startup CEO class, but you did get a lot of VC questions. Of course, people are interested in funding. So anything you want to add at the end? Or?
No, I think that last point is important. I think a lot of VC, you don't want to spend them. People, you're so tight on money, you don't necessarily want to pay someone to help you with a pitch, but that can be money really, really well spent. And because you're spending so much time, realize it's an iterative process anyway, right? So you don't want to go if you think there's an ideal funder, you don't want them to be your first pitch. So get someone to help you, then also schedule practice pitches, right? Because every time I've done this, my pitches got better and better and better and better. And and you get 3 people asking about the market, you realize I'm not doing a good job telling the market story. I got to go back and I got to develop new slides and a new way to tell the market story. So you got to really do all those practice pitches and get someone to help you and get Serena to help you tell the story. And then you approach the people that you really are on your A list.
I have to at least give one plug because KFA does have a course called Startup Pitch, which Chris Lipp, who's a communications coach at Stanford, wrote a book called Startup Pitch, and he's very good. And there is also a course that will be offered in the winter on that. So
Great.
Anyway, Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, take care.